Organizational culture is one of the core foundations of any organization, but it's also one of the key enablers or inhibitors of transformation. But what exactly is culture? What does it mean to your organization? That's what I'm going to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And one of the most overlooked aspects of transformation is culture. A lot of times organizations have deliberately created a certain type of culture. In other cases, they haven't. But regardless, if you're going through a transformation, you want to be very clear and deliberate about what your culture is today, what that means to your overall transformation, and what you want your culture to be in the future, and how you can start to bend the needle on that culture to enable the type of transformation you're looking for. But to get there, we need to understand what are those different components of culture, what does it mean? Because if we just look at culture as a big bucket, it doesn't mean much. It's very nebulous, it's very vague. And so what I want to do today is unpack culture and understand what all the different dimensions are and make it a little bit more tangible and pragmatic for you. Now, when we look at culture as a big bucket, there's a lot of different dimensions that fit within that and that drive and affect your culture. The first one, in no particular order, by the way, is going to be human capital management. So human capital management is everything related to HR, the hiring, the recruiting, the performance management, everything related to human capital management. So when you think about the culture you're trying to create or the culture you accidentally have, it has a lot to do with the types of people you hire, how you develop them, how you recruit them, the types of personalities you look for, and even individual cultural fits within your organization. So human capital management is a first step or a first dimension of culture. Another important dimension is values. So what are the values of you as an organization? So in other words, do you value collaboration? Do you value individual performance? Do you value paying people a lot? Do you value high levels of intelligence? There's all these different things that you as an organization might value. And every organization has its own unique sets of values. And so the values you have as an organization influence the type of culture you have, and vice versa. The type of culture you have is going to influence your values. Same goes for HCM and everything else we talk about, by the way. It goes both ways, actually, because you, on one hand, want to create the culture and craft the culture you want, and the culture also affects those dimensions as well. So also look at values and understand what your values are and clearly articulate those, because that's going to influence your culture as well. Another dimension of culture is performance management. And performance management is a lot like HCM, and in fact, some might argue that it is a subset of HCM, and they may be right, but rather than slice hairs, what I'd like to do is talk about performance management on its own, because it is so important to the type of culture that you're shaping. So performance management is essentially how you reward people, how you compensate them, the things that you value within your workforce. All those things are critical to crafting the type of culture that you want. For example, if you value individual performance, then you want to reward for individual performance. You want to make sure that the performance management you have in place is driving and supporting the type of culture you're trying to create. Another dimension is organizational design. And this is a fancy consulting term that could also be interpreted as job roles and responsibilities. So what do people do? Who's responsible for what? How do they collaborate? What are the org chart arrows and lines on the org chart? All that stuff affects your culture as well. Another important component of culture is your leadership team. So the types of leaders you hire, how you reward them, how you expect them to engage the rest of your team. And while, again, this might be a bit of overlap with HCM, it is worth calling out separately as a standalone component of culture. And then finally, one other component of culture that I'll talk about today actually sounds like it has nothing to do with culture, but it has a lot to do with it, and that is your business processes. So most people don't equate a connection between these two things, but when you're looking at your business processes absolutely affect your culture. If you have a very highly technical or a very streamlined automated set of business processes, that's going to affect your culture in a different way than if you have manual paper-based processes or painful processes that are difficult to execute. So your business processes affect your culture, and your culture ultimately ends up affecting your business processes as well. So these are the major components of culture. They're not all of them, but they're the major ones that are most relevant to organizations. And one of the key things to think about is how well aligned your culture is. And a lot of times organizations think they have a culture in mind or a vision for their future state culture, but these other activities don't support that. They're out of sync. So for example, if we value collaboration and we're saying we want to be a highly collaborative workforce, but over here in performance management, we're rewarding for individual performance. So right there you can see there's a disconnect between the culture we want and this dimension of culture, which is performance management. Another example, using that same example, would be if you're valuing collaboration, but your org design, your org structure supports individuality and doesn't have a lot of cross-pollination or collaboration between departments, that's another disconnect between your intended culture and your actual culture. So it's really important to look at all the dimensions of culture and make sure that you have alignment with where you are today and what you're trying to be, but also looking to the future of what you want your culture to transform into. And you want to make sure as you go through that transformation that all of these pieces are aligned. If you're going through any sort of transformation, whether it's a digital transformation, business transformation, a merger and acquisition integration, whatever the case may be, you want to think about what our future state culture is. And just as importantly, if not more importantly, you want to define how these different dimensions of culture can evolve or should evolve to support that culture. So using the example before of an individuality-based culture transitioning to more of a collaborative culture, we might first of all define that as our desired future state or a characteristic of our future state culture and value. But we also need to make sure that these other pieces reflect that. And so that's the way we can start to bend the needle. We know that we're not going to change the culture overnight. Most M&A integrations or digital transformations, business transformations might only last 1, 2, 3 years, whatever the case may be. It may seem like a long time, but that it really isn't a long time when you think about culture. Culture is something that's been embedded within your organization for years, if not decades, sometimes over 100 years if you're an older organization. So it's not going to change overnight, but you can start to be deliberate about that future state vision of your culture, and you can start to bend the needle of what you want your culture to look like by influencing these different variables, which then in turn will influence your culture. So in other words, it's not enough just to come out and say we want to create a collaborative culture. We need to have the supporting variables to support that future state vision. So I hope this has given you some things to think about as you define your culture and you think about your culture. And I highly encourage you to define your culture and to have a cultural transformation component of your overall digital or business transformation. Because without having that cultural transformation work stream, you're just going to end up with a culture that's accidental, or worse yet, one that undermines or creates headwinds for your overall transformation. So you can think of culture as something that's sort of the secret sauce, the thing that helps your change initiatives and it helps your people and the soul of your company adapt and evolve into what you want it to be in the future. So in addition to culture, there's other organizational change components that you want to consider. And for that, I encourage you to check out our Guide to Organizational Change Management. I've included a link to that below. You can download that guide. It talks about culture, but it also talks about all the different components of organizational change and the human people side of change. So I encourage you to check that out below. And I've also included a number of other organizational change resources as it relates to business and digital transformation. So I hope you found this information useful and I hope you have a great day.